We are back. All right, Ms. Reese, if you'll call your next witness.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, we need to pick that date. I'm sorry.
October 16th.
October 16th works for everybody? All right, let me go ahead then and release the DCS and Camelot workers
Yeah,
at
we
this
could call
time.
him in.
That would be,
And then I have another one also that I had set for Friday to come in, so I'll tell her to, for the 16th.
yeah,
Right,
that's probably
'cause You're
better.
gonna call both parties? Are you calling both parties? Okay.
Okay. That's Miss Judith Mullins and Leanne Clark. If you'll just have them come on in for a second for me. So October 16th works for everybody.
Can you email me those? This?
Yeah, you should we keep it then? Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna hang on to it until I make sure I get it, but can you
Okay.
email all of these to me?
Well, I didn't scan them all. I'll
Okay,
scan the
I'll
first
just.
one.
Just keep it till Friday. Would you rather us keep it?
Yeah, that'd be better. But the subpoena's continuing, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I
You
think.
wanna try to call her? Or you just wanna wait and try to do that?
I can call her.
Miss Mullins, Miss Clark, y'all don't have to, we're not going to get to y'all today. And so what we're going to do is we've picked a date in October, which will be October the 16th. And we will have you all come back at that point. I will make sure that whichever party has subpoenaed you will reissue you a subpoena for that October the 16th.
Well,
not
subpoenas are
continuing?
continuing in nature, so can I just do an order that the subpoenas are continuing?
We could do that, and we'll give y'all a court date slip so you make sure you have that.
Okay.
So October 16th at 9 o'clock.
We can always propose them if we want, the expectations. I'm just trying to find this one.
Who would pay for it?
I think I can submit
You should talk to me about that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you all. Sorry for the wait.
That's all right, thank you.
All right. And then you are, sir, I'm sorry, you are
Oh, this
Just
is
for-
Kathy
okay.
McGee's, Danny McGee.
Danny McGee. All right, thank you.
And I have no objection to him saying that.
Okay. All right, now we're ready to call your next witness?
All right. That's
All right.
Elizabeth Getz.
Mr. Who?
Getz. And just remind you, Your Honor, if I may still stay out for 10 minutes.
At 3 o'clock, yes, if you'll remind me, because I won't remember. All right, just have a seat right there, Ms. Getz.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your name for the court?
Elizabeth Getz,
And what is your position?
Assistant Principal at Gallup Elementary School,
How long have you been at Gallup?
2 years.
And how were you employed before that?
I was at Stratton Elementary School,
How long were you at Stratton?
5 years as an assistant principal.
Okay. And what is your training to be an assistant principal?
I have an educational specialist degree in administration from Purdue University.
I'm a Hoosier, that could be an issue.
I'm truly a Notre Dame undergrad, so we'll be all right.
I need to Purdue too.
All right.
And do you have the opportunity in your position as assistant principal to regularly interact with the students?
Yes.
How does it come about that you get to interact with the students?
Well, in a variety of ways. It could be anywhere from arrival, where we're just out and ready to be seen, or out at the buses if people call us out, or helping with staffing issues. Often, if we're in the office, behavior issues are brought into the office. And observations when we're in classrooms observing teachers.
Have you had the chance to interact with Delora?
Yes, I have.
And how frequently would you say you've had the chance to interact with her?
Well, as of late, not much, to be honest. In the last, I'd say that maybe 3 weeks, that's a guesstimate. But prior to that, frequently was called to the classroom, saw her maybe in the hallway or in the office.
You said that you were called to the classroom. What was the reason that you were being called to the classroom? Delara she was disrupting in some way. Often she left the classroom and I would find her in the hallway. She might be up in the classroom and just wandering around and in other children's space. What is the procedure for how a teacher reaches out to you when they're having issues with the student?
Typically, they'll call the office.
Okay. And then do you come to the classroom usually?
In this case, yes, almost every time. Sometimes she was escorted to the office by adults.
How do you make the determination when the student will go to the office and leave the classroom?
When they choose not to participate in the class is the shortest way to say it.
Okay.
Obviously, when I'm called, the first effort is to keep her in the classroom and help her join the instruction or whatever's happening. Or if I find her in the hallway, try to give her some time to settle down, talk. Are we ready to go back in? Maybe spend a few minutes to make sure that she's settled, but I probably could count on one finger the times that she was ready to go back as opposed to she needed more time out.
What are some of the things you do to interact with her when you get called down?
I mostly just try to connect. Learned very quickly that discussing the issue immediately just escalated her. So a completely different conversation most often worked. So something completely unrelated. Could be Pokemon or some other thing that she's interested in, but talking about something completely different, and then she'll start to engage. Because typically she'd be shut down by the time I'm called.
Prior to recently, when you said that you haven't had to interact with her as much, how frequently were you being asked to get involved?
Anywhere from 1 to several times a day.
And how severe were her behavior outbursts?
Well, she could be very aggressive. She would hit or kick or scream or elope. Most often running didn't seem to be, I never worried she would run out and away from the building, but it was more attention getting. Are you gonna follow me if I run out of the building? So she would stop towards the door if she realized that we weren't gonna chase her. But I've been, hit and growled at and scratched, and she crawls on the ground or tries to kind of shoulder or ram into you.
When did you first notice these behavioral issues?
Last school year in the spring, maybe January of 2016.
And were the issues at that time as severe as they have been this year?
I think that's pretty hard to quantify.
Were you
Were
being
the-
asked to get involved as frequently last year?
In the spring. So in the fall, I would say I didn't even know she was a student at Gower, to be honest, because I meet the children who present themselves in the office most often with various behavior concerns. So, and somehow in the spring, all of a sudden, I said, where has she been? Because her first introduction to me was a volatile one, and I was surprised that I wouldn't have met her before that.
Do you remember approximately when that was?
If I had to guess, I would say January 2016. Excuse me.
And in the spring of last year, approximately how frequently were you having to get involved?
I honestly can't even make a guess.
Was it as frequent as it is this year?
If I had to guess, I would say a little less frequent.
Do you remember if it was a daily type thing as it has been this year?
I object, she's already testified, asked and answered.
I'll sustain.
Do you remember if the actions last year rose to the same level of severity as this year?
Relatively similar, yes.
Do you remember how many times you contacted Mr. Gadair last year to discuss the actions?
I couldn't recall how many times, no.
Do you remember if you did at all?
I can't think of a particular incident, but I would guess that I would have contacted him. I would have to, I would say check my records, but I'm not sure that I would have reported speaking to him unless it was a suspension. Excuse me.
How does the school determine when it is appropriate to suspend a student?
Well, there's a lot of considerations that go in there. Sorry, I think I got it. I have allergies right now.
With some water. Excuse me. You made me cough. Would some water help too?
Thank you.
Ms. Getz, would you, what?
Water would be fantastic.
You get some water. Okay.
When it would be appropriate to contact a parent?
Yes.
That's the question. Typically, it's kind of an escalating type of a thing. So if it's a first incident with the child and they've never made an office visit before, then I would call a parent and say, you know, I wanted to let you know that I met with your child. When they frequently come to the office, it depends on how elevated the situation is. If there is, so there's no definitive answer. It's a case by case.
Do you recall how many times last year Delara was suspended from school?
I do not.
Do you
I brought this year's information. The subpoena asked for from January 1, 2017.
Do you remember any instances when she was suspended?
Not offhand.
How does the school determine when it is appropriate to suspend a child?
Well, definitely if they're physical towards peers or others, it's a consideration. We try to determine all of the facts. Was it retaliatory? What caused the inflammation in the situation? So again, a variety of considerations, and certainly someone that we're aware of with, you know, we're talking about Delara, and we know that she had different things going on in her life, so we try to make take extra steps to accommodate her in the school. So when another child, depending on the situation, may or may not have gotten suspended for something, we're aware of different kids and their situations and try to consider that.
What are some of the extra steps that you would take to accommodate Delara?
Well, keeping them in school, number one. Keeping them trying to get them back into the classroom, talking to the school counselor, talking to the parents, obviously working with, we had BCBA last year just for Gower, for Certified Behavior Analyst. So she actually helped us with this case. So different things like that.
And what was her role in the case?
She actually helps, she observes children and their behavior, tries to determine the function of that behavior, and then writes a behavior plan, you know, appropriate ways to respond so as not to reinforce the behavior.
And this BCBA started her involvement when?
Well, we hired her last January, and I don't recall if she got on that case in the spring or if it was in the fall, but she was definitely involved at some point. Let me see if I have that in my notes.
I don't have that in these notes. So we have a school BCBA, or we did have one, but then there's also behavior analyst for the district. Behavior analyst for the district made entries in September of 2016. But we had our Gower BCBA on the case, and that isn't in his notes as to when she became involved.
Where would those notes be as for when the BCBA got involved?
I would have to check that at school. She was a position that we created, actually just for Gower. So we were working on job description and
Okay, so would there be anywhere that her notes were recorded if she was involved last year?
I might have emails, is what I'm guessing.
So at what point in your notes do you first see any kind of involvement from the BCBA?
September 2016 from the Metro BCBA.
All right, and what were the recommendations made at that time?
Well, that isn't in this. These are the S&I records that I brought, the support and intervention records from Data Warehouse. So those exact recommendations aren't here.
Do you recall what the recommendations were?
She helped us create a behavior plan.
And what was that behavior plan?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Is that behavior plan still in place?
I believe a variation.
Okay, what's the behavior plan that's currently in place?
I don't have that with me.
Is it, who is typically in charge of implementing the behavior plan?
The classroom teacher.
Okay. When you become involved for your role as the assistant principal, are you involved in implementing it at all?
Not most often. So if we're called at that point, usually then they're removed and then we handle them in the office.
Does the BCBA behavior plan typically involve how punishment or suspension or handling disciplinary actions will occur?
Not typically, it's just how you respond to the child's behavior immediately.
Okay. Wouldn't it make sense for all people who are responding to the child's behavioral actions to be aware of how they were supposed to be responding to those actions?
I object, Judge. It's argumentative with this, and this is her own witness.
I'm just gonna say that.
Is there a reason why you were not made aware of how to respond to Dolores' behavior?
Well, I'm certain I was made aware of it,
Okay.
but can I recall off the top of my head, we have 700 students and many, many students with behavior problems. So, I can't recall off the top of my head.
How do you typically respond when Dolores has a behavior issue?
As I stated before, most often I'm called down to the classroom, but most often I find her in the hallway. And usually I'll sit with her and try to read her temperature, if you will, to see how escalated or not is she. I think I've been able to get her back into the classroom maybe once or twice. Most often she's still pretty upset. But most often we have a good enough relationship that I can talk to her and say, would you like to walk with me and come to the office? That said, at least a handful of times we need to physically escort her.
Once she gets to the office, what typically happens then?
She'll sit in the office and cool down and get to a place where we can process what happened.
Do you do anything differently with Delara than you would do for any other student who was having a similar reaction like that?
Well, differently in terms of, I guess, understanding level and maybe tolerance level. But no, not anything else. I mean, we would just try to bring anyone else in there, give them the time that they need to process and talk and try to get them back to the classroom.
And so I'm just trying to understand the role of the behavioral plan. I don't mean to offend you, I'm just trying to make sure I understand how all of this works. So the behavioral plan is more for how the teachers are going to react to the students when they
In the
have
classroom,
behavior
correct.
issues. And then when it comes to your role to step in, it's more of just calming them down, getting them to the office, and that fairly similar for all the students. Is that accurate?
Relatively
Okay.
accurate, yes.
At some point in time, was there an S team created to handle Dolores' issues?
Yes, but, let's see if I have that timeline. Realizing it sounds like I should have brought her Cume file, that would have been more helpful. I don't have her S-Team file with me, so I don't see that information here.
Do you remember generally when it was that the S-team was created?
I do not. I couldn't speak to that offhand.
Do you remember who it was that initiated the request for an S-team?
Typically, teachers do, so I couldn't say I know, but typically teachers do.
And what is the process when a teacher initiates a request for an S-team?
Well, in a case where it's behavioral concern, such as this one, it's much more straightforward. So we're aware that there are behavior issues, the teacher expresses, a concern, and then we have one of our school counselors as the S-team coordinator. So she actually handles the meetings, and the administrators are not involved in the first several steps.
Who is typically involved in the first several steps?
It usually starts with the teacher and the grade level. And then the teacher works with the school counselor and they meet with the parent. And then you go from there. So you may or may not have a second S-team. You may or may not then proceed to where maybe the psychologist would be involved, which is where we got this year finally. And that's when the administrators also come, when there's a move to should we test.
Are there ever instances when a teacher requests that an S-team be created that request is denied or deemed not necessary?
No,
Okay.
there shouldn't be.
So whenever a teacher requests it, an S-team will be created, and that will involve the counselor, the teacher, and the parents initially. Is that-
Mhm.
And what is typically the goal of the S-team?
In my mind, to come, just put everyone's heads together, kind of create a team, all get on the same page. Are we all seeing the same things? What are you seeing at home? What are you seeing at school? How do we best attack this from all angles?
Do they then report to the administration what kind of next steps they have come up with?
No, not necessarily.
And so you said that if it's determined that further actions will be needed or another S-team meeting will be necessary, that's usually when the administration will come in. Is that correct?
Typically, but it depends, yes. But if there's going to be any conversation about should we test, should we look at, is there any kind of a disability, that for sure is a definitive answer. That's when an administrator needs to be there.
Was an administrator eventually involved in an S-team for Delara?
Yes, when it got to the stage of should we test or not.
And do you remember when that would have been?
Is it in the fall? This past fall? I mean, she was just identified, I think the psych report, we have the psych report, so the dates would clue us in on that. So I believe we had our final meeting where she got her, where the IEP was created in April, I want to say. But I think everyone probably has.
Okay. And so would you have been involved in the process of actually creating the IEP then?
I was actually not in that meeting. Most often, yes, that's my primary role, but that particular day, I believe we were double booked. And Ms. Frazier was in the meeting where the IEP was actually created.
Do you know what the details of the IEP were, what the decision was?
Well, if I remember correctly, it was determined that she was going to have a
Judge, I'm going to
primary-
object unless you lay a foundation of personal knowledge.
Did you see a copy of the IEP?
I have seen a copy, but I would not feel comfortable talking about specifics.
Would it help you to see a copy?
It would help me.
Well, Your Honor, she didn't participate in it. I think it's going to be hearsay asked to her. I don't think that she can admit it unless she's going to admit it as a school record. And if she does, then I won't object as as a school record and as a custodian, a person who could identify school records, which I'll be asking her to do the same.
I can lay the foundation for that first if you like.
But I think she said she's not going to object to that if that's
If it's basically as a person with authority to identify records.
That's what she is.
Yes.
Okay.
I can do that.
I just want to be clear as to how we're entering, because I think Ms. Regulate said if we're doing it one way, then we're objecting, if we're going to do it this way.
we're all on a page and she can enter it into the objection as the custodian of the records when she identifies what it is. And she's the custodian of the
Yeah,
records.
she just can't
has
give
to
opinions on
identify
it, she didn't participate in it, so.
Would you please review this document?
Do you have another copy, because I never got it? Thank you. Never got it.
And what is this document that I have given you?
So the first page is a prior written notice, and then it looks like the individual education plan is the rest of the packet, yes.
Okay, and you said that the first page is what?
Prior written notice,
And what is a prior written notice?
that this is what we need to provide to parents. Typically, we send one home before the meeting with what we are planning to do, what the actions that we're thinking will take place in the meeting, and then one is sent after, and I couldn't tell you which one this is at a glance, as to basically a summary of what was decided at the meeting.
And then the rest of the packet is an IEP?
I'm sorry, this one looks like it was sent, this is the prior written notice that is sent after, which is very confusing, but yes, and this is the IEP.
And does this appear to be the IEP for Delara?
We'll stipulate it's the IEP.
Okay.
So we don't have an objection to entering this in as the
No,
IEP?
it's IEP, I got it.
All right. That'll be
Exhibit
exhibit
three.
number 3 to today's meeting.
Were you provided a copy of this IEP, or would you have been provided a copy of this IEP after it was created?
I have access to it through Easy IEP, but I don't most often get paper copies.
Have you had the chance to review the IEP in the past?
Briefly, but not to the letter.
Are you familiar with what suggestions were implemented or what the next steps would be after the IEP was put in place?
Again, this is where I enter my objection. She's here as the custodian is entering the IEP, but she's already testified she didn't participate in the meeting. She's never really reviewed it for the letter and doesn't implement it, isn't really personally implementing it. So I would object on that basis.
Well, Your Honor, she hasn't said she's not personally implementing it. She said she wasn't there for the meeting. That doesn't mean that as a staff member and as an administrator of the school that she's not a part of administering the IEP.
Well, maybe that needs to be the question then, whether or not she had a role.
All right. If you'll refresh your question.
As an administrator of Gower Elementary, do you help to administrate some of the provisions of an IEP?
I do. Actually, I'm charged with being the administrator for the special ed department. So I would I would assist with mapping, which basically means how services are provided. How do we make staff available for all of the different needs?
So after an IEP is created, even if you were not in the initial meeting, would it then be your role to help make that IEP come to life?
Correct. We would definitely talk about the services page and make sure that we have the staff, where do they need to be when, and make sure that that's covered.
And did that type of communication occur for Delara's IEP?
Yes.
So you would have had a chance to review the IEP and help figure out what staff need to go where, is that correct?
Yes, we would have talked about the services and how to make sure that those happened.
Do you recall what the services were for Delara's IEP?
So on page 10, with those in front of me, so direct special ed time, we have the special ed teacher 25 minutes a day, and it's special ed aid and regular program 30 minutes a day. Which means an assistant goes to the 10-minute classroom.
Looking at the IEP on page 2, there's a part that says current descriptive information and a part that says present levels of performance. How is this information obtained?
The descriptive information happens in the meeting, and there's a conversation about what are the student's strengths, and any member who's in the meeting contributes. Same with, well, the parent concerns, obviously, that's where the parent speaks up. And then how the disability adversely impacts is somewhat of a generic statement saying that the child needs more than just general education services.
And in this case, it would appear that the areas for improvement that are needed are interpersonal skills. Is that correct?
Based on the underlying descriptive information, yes.
And is that just that, or I guess who makes the decision about the areas for improvement that are needed?
Well, I must say that the psych eval is also, so to answer that question sounds a little bit different to me. The psych eval helps drill down in terms of what areas need to be identified.
Okay, so the IEP is created based on the psych eval, is that correct?
Not wholly, but that's a driving force, yes.
On page 3, it mentioned a subtest of the behavioral symptoms index and a subtest of externalizing problems composite, and mentions a date administered of 4/3/17. Would that have been a part of the psych eval?
It appears to be, yes. Typically, that is what, one of the measures that our psychologist uses.
For present level of performance, it indicates that Delara's scores place her in the clinically significant range for exhibiting behavioral symptoms and externalizing problems. What does that mean to you as an administrator?
That means that,
Okay, and I'm going to object if she's going to offer a psychological interpretation of that.
I wasn't asking for a psychological interpretation. When they see that as an
It's
administrator in
concerning.
an IEP, what does that mean? What do you do when you see that?
well, it's concerning, but if you see the measures, which when we have in the meeting and the psych reports in front of you, there's actually columns. And often it's the parent's response in one column, the teacher's response in another, and then another column where it talks about clinically significant or maybe slightly elevated, or at risk, I believe is the other one, and then there's like a typical range. So you have to look at all of that in context. So it looks like these were pulled out because they were clinically significant.
On page 8, for program participation, it appears to list some goals. How are these goals arrived?
No, these are not goals, these are accommodations. So
Okay.
different things to consider when working with her. Typically in the classroom is where these would be implemented. So it's a gen ed setting. So this is where Ms. Pickett would use these strategies.
So the gen ed setting means that that's the part that occurs mainly in the classroom, is that correct?
Mhm.
So providing a choice of reinforcers, self-monitoring checklists, reinforcement-based, accelerated consequences, all of those things.
Mhm.
And then is it up to the individual teacher what that actually looks like in application?
Generally, yes, but they have, so Ms. Wilhelm is the case manager, so she would help work with Ms. Pickett on how that looks. She's the special education teacher, and then also we have behavior specialists that she could access if she needed help with that.
The special education related services are detailed on page 10. What does that look like in practice?
Well, the top part where it says direct special education services, that means that it needs to be a certified special education teacher.
And would that be Ms. Wilhelm?
In this case, it is Ms. Wilhelm. And so to the far right, it talks about location of services. So Delara would stay in her general education spot and the teacher goes to her.
And what kind of things would the teacher do while she's with her?
This is set up, if I remember correctly, as a kind of a check-in, check-out type of a situation. And so check-in in the morning, and how you doing? What are our goals for the day? I don't know if she has an exact, oftentimes there's a piece of paper that goes with that, but I can't tell you in this particular situation where they set goals, and then at the end of the day, same thing. How did the day go?
Since this IEP has been implemented, have you noticed any improvements in Dolores' behavior?
Well, the date of the IEP is April 12th, and I noticed that her last suspension was a couple of days before that, and I don't have a lot of interaction with her since then.
So that would apply to you?
So that would imply to me that something is going much better.
Is there anything, as the assistant principal, is there anything that you think the parents could be doing at home to help make your job easier with IEP and all that at school?
Yes. But I haven't been at home with them, so I don't know. But parents, when parents set strict boundaries at home, when they use common language, if Delora has a certain plan at school, or say her daily colors, if the parents are talking about, you got a pink, why was it a pink? Or, you got a straight face, or whatever that her exact situation is. Using a common language, having strict boundaries, all of those things help. Getting the kids to school on time. Kids are often thrown off if they're late to school, if they're picked up early, if they don't get enough sleep, all of those factors.
Have you had the chance to communicate with either or both of Dolores' parents?
Yes, both.
How frequently have you been in, I guess, mother first?
Mother is email, and I think depending on what's going on, it's more often. Sometimes it seems to come in bunches, and then maybe not for a long time, and then
And what is the typical subject of the emails?
most often, if there were when suspensions were happening for a while, she's always asking what happened and why she's suspended, and has questions about that.
And do you answer those questions?
I send the discipline referral.
And what about communications with father?
They have been much fewer lately, but we talk on the phone on occasion. If I can't get Delora to settle down, that might be a time when I call him, because we know her well enough now that we need to give her a little bit more time. But if she doesn't settle down, that might be when I call and say, we need you to pick her up. She's not going to be getting on the bus, as an example.
When does the school start looking at what classes the children will be placed in for next year?
We're about to do that, actually. So right about now, in the next couple of weeks.
And can you describe what that process looks like?
I'd say, for lack of a better way to phrase it, the teachers are charged with kind of making a baseball card for each child. So, all the fun facts about the kids, their academics, strengths, weaknesses, growth, present levels, behavior, who they mix with, any child that they shouldn't be placed with. All of those things kind of go on a little index card. And then the teachers actually kind of group the kids, and then they leave that with us for the summer. And so then over the summer, kids move in, move out, and then most often the principal, she's on a 12-month contract, she looks at the groupings, she might adjust slightly, and then names teachers for the different groups.
When they're going to group the students together, do they also think about how the students' personalities will interact with different teacher personalities?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And we would be well aware of a student such as Delora, and would choose carefully where she was placed.
Are there any considerations that you know are going to be thought about when placing her for next year?
Probably similar to this year, we would try to pick a teacher who is sensitive to her situation and probably has good, strong behavior management skills, yet a softer side, that understanding piece. Someone who understands special ed and how that all works. And then somebody who is able to differentiate the curriculum to meet her needs, because she's extremely smart and she needs to continue to be challenged to keep her busy.
And are there any students that you know that you would avoid placing her with?
Yes,
And what is that based on?
based on their continued conflict this year.
I don't think I have any further questions.
All right, Ms. Regular.
How are you, Miss Deb? I met you briefly, I think, in
Well,
December,
yes.
before you went on your cruise,
Yes,
right?
that is right.
We had some discussions about that in the courtroom.
Well, it sounded glamorous, but I had to study the whole cruise.
Oh. All right, well, I am Connie Regularly. I'm here for the mother today, and I've been patiently listening to all your testimony about the IEP and your history with Dolores since January 2016. And I went through the IEP just now, since Mother had not received a copy of it before. And the one thing that I notice in here is there's really nothing in here about Mom, right? Either good or bad or indifferent or participating in or not, or, I mean, it's really just kind of silent related to her, right?
Well, she wasn't at the meeting, so that would be correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And this notice, and I noticed the same thing, it says meeting date 4/12/2017, it says date sent 4/25/2017. This is a notice of a meeting, so can you tell me why that date's messed up? Do you know?
No, it's actually, that's the confusing part. So it's called prior written notice, but in special ed, that means it is a notice to the parents prior to the implementation. So even though, it's
Okay.
very confusing.
But they also are supposed to give notice of the meeting to
We
parents,
give
right?
notice, there is one required notice, and Metro asks us to do two, one before and one after.
Okay. And do you have anything, or do you have any knowledge whether the mother even got notice that the IEP was going to happen?
I can't speak to that particularly. I do know that I worked with the psychologist to make sure she was involved in that process.
To make sure the mother was involved
The
in
mother
it?
was involved and got to contribute to the psych eval.
Okay. What did you do to, you say
To
I?
facilitate that,
Yeah.
I spoke to the psychologist and asked if she had reached out to the mother and gotten any of her input and suggested that that would be a good idea. And that same moment, I believe she sent a certified mail, sent something to Ms. Hubble.
Okay. Did you give her email address or anything like that? Do you know?
I believe she sent it through the mail.
Okay.
Because it was one of those rating scales that you need to, it's not something you could email.
Okay. All right, so, and then I just kind of want to, for the record, I want to make sure we're clear on the dates. And so this says here on the very first page, April 12th, 2017, right, the meeting date,
Correct.
right? And then I looked at on the IEP itself, page 1, and it has that this is the IEP 4, and it has a date range, but it says from 4/12/2017 for the next year, right?
Correct.
All right, now I'm a little bit confused though. You said that the 4/25, the date sent, would this have been implemented before 4/25 or after 4/25?
No,
You
it
see
looks
that?
like I understand your point, yes.
Okay, I'm just asking.
And it looks like, according to the date on the IEP, that the implementation date would be the 12th. And that notice was sent on the 25th. I want to say, I would have to double check the law, but there is within a certain number of days, and it's typically 10 or 14 days where that notice would be required to be sent, so I feel like we're close to that. I
Okay.
feel like we're in the range where it's reasonable.
well, and I'm not really trying to beat you up on the 25th. What I'm really trying to get down to is when this plan actually was implemented and how you know that. So,
Well, it's based on this date, so that's the date that should start.
okay, so by 4/12, you had, so let's see, 4/12 was let me see here, let me look real quick. Wednesday. So how quickly would you have had these services that you've got indicated here on?
And the next day, if they met on the 11th, that would then started on the 12th. If it started on the 12th, it would have been on the next day.
Okay, on the 13th, that would have started then, right? Because this is dated the 12th.
Did they meet on the 12th, or is this,
It says meeting date right here, 4/12.
yeah, so the services would start the day after, because I don't know what time the meeting was, but then obviously the school day is going, and so then we put them in place the very next day after the meeting.
Okay, so
Does that
April
answer your
13th.
question?
April 13th,
Fair enough.
right? I mean, that, to your best knowledge, based
To
upon
my
everything
best
you have in
knowledge.
front of you, and based upon your typical course of action when you get an IEP, you can sit here and tell the court today, I can pretty well tell you, we started services on the 13th.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, again, I'm not trying to give you a trick question here. I know I'm a
I'm ready
lawyer
for
and
that.
you're like, okay. All right, so, and also there's one other thing I noticed on here I want to talk to you about just a second. All right, can you turn to page 6 in the IEP?
Yes.
Okay, so page 6 has 3 measurable annual goals and benchmarks, right? It says at the
Yes.
top of it. And just in sum, it looks like the first one is completing 90% of her assignments within the allotted time. The second one is calming strategy and social problem solving skills. And then the third one is about using kind words, remaining in designated area, keeping hands and feet to herself. Basically, in sum, that's kind of what those 3 are,
Mhm.
right? All right, now how are those measured?
Well, data collection, it looks like they're using different data collection methods, so you would need to specifically talk to
Okay.
Ms. Pickett or Ms. Wilhelm, would have the specific measures.
Okay, and who is the responsible person for basically training Delara within these 3 areas? Is that the specialist that's going in?
Probably Ms. Wilhelm, but Ms. Pickett would also help.
Okay. So after the IEP, then they set specific things that they're trying to do to train Delara on kind of these 3 specific target areas, right? Target skills that they're working on.
Yes?
You've gotten to, Ms. Pickett now has a psychological that she's had an opportunity to review, right? Dr. Ashford's psychological. Is that provided to Ms. Pickett? Or do you know?
I can't answer that.
Okay, that's
specifically.
fine. And then you have this special ed teacher who I'm assuming has some special education and training in this particular area to help children with these specific skills.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it's after those things are in place, apparently, it looks like from everything I've heard today, Delara starts doing better. Right?
It does appear that way, yes.
Okay. Now, just kind of an out there question, but you've been having these terrible problems with Delara since January of 2016. Do you know why it took until April 2017 to get an IEP and get some of this assistance for her?
Well, last year's situation, if I remember correctly, in the fall, there was one teacher because her homeroom teacher was on maternity leave, and in the spring, the teacher came back from maternity leave. So I do think that was somewhat of a factor in terms of teachers. And I don't know, I can't explain the fall, but in the spring, I became aware of Delara. And as a lot of our teachers do, they are wonderful, they bend over backwards, they want the kids in the classroom. And, so her start of the year was kind of in January. So her tolerance level and learning her students and all of that started in January, not in August.
January
Of
16.
2016,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So when that teacher returned, then she is gonna do everything that she can to keep Delora in the classroom, build a rapport, work with her, and keep her in the room. Because as all teachers know, as soon as you involve the office, you've lost some of your power.
Mhm.
And that is one of those teachers who is determined to handle her business. So yes, did she have to call us on occasion? Yes, but she really is, again, started in
Okay, sure.
January and.
Yeah, okay.
and-
All right, so I have just another question then about Delara's first grade year, and you mentioned it, and I wanted to ask you, so I'm glad you brought it up. She actually had 2 different teachers during that school year,
Yes, she
right?
did.
So the first one she had when she came in August was there until when?
I believe through the fall. I want to say that she came back from maternity leave in January.
In January. Okay, so for a first grader, maybe a bit of a disruption to be changing teachers in the middle of the year. Would you agree?
Perhaps.
Okay. All right, now, and I think you've already answered this, but you can't testify today about whether or not she was suspended in her first grade year, right?
I don't recall offhand.
All right, you had we've previously been provided some educational records, and I want you to just take a look at those if you could. There's an affidavit on the front of them, and just see if you can flip through those and you recognize those to be educational records.
Yes, this is what we sent in a couple of months ago. wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mhm. So I have a similar data warehouse report with me now.
Okay, I just have a couple questions about those records, actually.
Okay.
So, right here. I want you to tell me, we're looking at a document that says a student record, school year 16-17, and this number right, and this is as, oops, I'm sorry.
I don't know, this might be a good time for us to stop if you can take a pause on those records
Okay, sure.
and then let her make her phone call.
Very brief.
Okay. All right, we'll take about a 5-minute pause, hopefully.
Recess for 5 minutes.